A little girl started acting strange, trembling every time her stepdad came near. One day, she whispered to her mom, "Stepdad did it again." What happened after the 911 call changed their lives forever. Watch till the end to see the truth that shocked everyone. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories. Check out other videos on this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Nia stood on the cracked balcony of the small apartment she shared with her daughter, Anya, staring out at the quiet street below where the street lights flickered in the early dawn. She hugged the old cardigan tighter around herself, trying to gather warmth before another long day began. In the other room, she could hear Ania's soft breathing, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept, her small hand clutching the ear of a worn teddy bear that had been passed down from Nia's own childhood. It was the only toy that had survived the many moves and hardships they had endured together. Life had taught Nia how to carry exhaustion without complaint. She worked 2 jobs, one cleaning hospital corridors during night shifts, the other behind a supermarket register during the day, often returning home with aching feet and swollen ankles, only to drop onto the couch for a moment's rest before Ania would crawl into her lap, hungry for the bedtime stories Nia read to her no matter how late it was. Even on days when her eyelids were so heavy she could barely keep them open, she would read softly, her voice cracking but her spirit steady, because it was the only promise she could give her daughter when the world gave them so little else. On her days off, which were rare, they would walk to the park a few blocks away, sharing an apple or a piece of bread, laughing at the birds that would peck near Anya's feet, and Nia would braid her daughter's thick, dark curls under the sunlight, promising her that someday they would have a yard of their own. Ania would look up at her with her large brown eyes, trusting and unbroken, believing that her mother's words were the truth that tomorrow would bring. It was during one of these rare afternoons, as Nia counted the change in her purse to buy Anya an ice cream, that she met Michael. He was standing in line behind her at the supermarket, holding a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, smiling kindly as Anya turned to look at him, shyly hiding behind Nia's skirt. His hair was neatly combed, his pale skin catching the light from the store's harsh bulbs, and his blue eyes softened when he noticed how Nia counted the last few coins with trembling fingers before she could afford the small cone for her daughter. "Let me get that for her," he had said, his voice calm and warm, and before Nia could protest, he handed a bill to the cashier and bent down to Anya's level, smiling gently. "Every princess deserves ice cream, don't you think?" Nia had hesitated, her pride catching in her throat, but the way Anya's face lit up as she received the cone was worth swallowing that pride for a moment. Michael did not ask for her number that day, nor did he linger unnecessarily, simply nodding politely before leaving the store, leaving behind a memory of his calm smile and a warmth that stayed in the small space they occupied for the rest of that afternoon. The next time they saw him was at the laundromat down the street. Michael was folding his clothes meticulously, and when he noticed Nia struggling with a jammed coin slot, he had stepped over, offering help without a trace of condescension. Their conversation was brief, but the way he listened made Nia feel, for the first time in a long time, that her words mattered. Ania, sitting on a bench with her teddy, watched them both, her legs swinging back and forth, and when Michael smiled at her, she smiled back, an unguarded, innocent smile that made Nia's heart twist with hope she had long tried to suppress. Weeks turned into months, and Michael began appearing more frequently in their lives. He would bring small things, like fresh fruit for Anya or a pack of coffee for Nia, explaining that he had bought too much and did not want it to go to waste. He fixed the leaking faucet in their kitchen, replaced a bulb in the hallway, and never asked for anything in return, brushing off Nia's thanks with a quiet, "It's nothing." His presence became a gentle constant, a reliable kindness that Nia had not realized she was starving for until it was there, offering her small, steady moments of relief in a life that often felt like a relentless tide pulling her under. Anya grew attached to him quickly. She began to wait by the window, watching for Michael's car to pull up, and would run to the door when she heard his knock. They baked cookies together, Anya giggling as flour dusted the counter, her small hands pressing into the dough under Michael's patient guidance. He would read her stories when Nia was too tired, his voice calm and measured, never rushing, always attentive to Anya's eager questions. Nia would watch them from the kitchen, her heart swelling and aching all at once, unable to remember the last time her daughter had laughed so freely. The day Michael asked them to move in with him, it was raining softly, the sky a pale gray that reflected off the puddles on the street. They were in his car, Anya in the back seat singing softly to herself when Michael, his hand steady on the wheel, spoke with a calm certainty that made Nia's breath catch. "I have space," he said, his eyes glancing at her briefly before returning to the road. "You both deserve more than what you've been given. Let me give it to you." Nia had hesitated, fear and hope warring inside her, the fear of losing herself, of repeating the mistakes of her past, of trusting someone only to be left broken again. But then she looked back at Ania, who was looking out the window with wonder, her reflection small and fragile in the glass, and she thought of the nights Anya fell asleep hungry because the refrigerator was nearly empty, the mornings she woke up cold because they could not afford to run the heater. She thought of the promises she had made to her daughter, promises of a better life, of safety and warmth. So she said yes. Moving day was a mixture of chaos and quiet hope. Michael's apartment was larger than any place Nia and Ania had lived in, with 2 bedrooms, a small balcony that overlooked a courtyard with neatly trimmed grass, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candles Michael burned in the evenings. He had prepared a room for Anya, painting the walls a soft pink, and setting up a small bookshelf with picture books and stuffed animals arranged neatly on the bed. When Anya saw the room, she had gasped, her small hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief before she ran to hug Nia, whispering, "Is this really for me?" Michael had stood at the door, smiling, his arms crossed loosely as he watched Ania explore her new space, picking up each stuffed animal, touching the curtains, opening and closing the small drawers as if she were making sure it was all real. Nia had watched him, gratitude rising in her throat, a quiet prayer forming in her heart that this time, this choice, would not end in the heartbreak she had known too many times before. That first night, they ate dinner together at the small wooden table Michael had set near the window. Anya chattered about school, about the girl who shared her crayons and the teacher who told stories about stars, her laughter filling the room like a melody Nia had missed without even knowing. Michael listened attentively, asking gentle questions, nodding and smiling, his gaze warm but never overpowering. After dinner, they watched a movie together. Anya nestled between them, her head resting on Nia's arm, her feet tucked under a blanket as the rain tapped gently against the window. When it was time for bed, Michael read Anya a story, his voice steady and low, the words weaving a soft magic that eased the small girl into sleep, her breathing even and calm. Nia stood by the door, watching as Michael gently adjusted the blanket around Anya, turning off the lamp and leaving the door slightly ajar before stepping out into the hallway. For a moment, their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw a reflection of the hope she held, fragile but present, a hope that whispered maybe, just maybe, they could finally have a family. That night, as Nia lay in the bed that Michael had bought for her, wrapped in clean sheets that smelled of lavender, she allowed herself to believe in the warmth of the moment. She listened to the soft rain outside, the hum of the city far in the distance, and, for the first time in many years, she fell asleep without the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. In the next room, her daughter slept peacefully, and in that moment, Nia believed she had made the right choice, that she had given Ania the gift of safety and love she had always promised. As the dawn crept into the sky the next morning, painting the world in shades of soft gold, Nia awoke to the sound of Ania's laughter drifting from the kitchen, where Michael was helping her pour cereal into a bowl, his gentle voice guiding her as she beamed with pride at her small accomplishment. Nia stood for a moment in the doorway, watching them, her hand pressed to her chest, allowing herself to breathe in the peace of this new life they were building together. She did not know then, standing in the glow of that morning light, that the peace she felt would soon crack under the weight of shadows she could not yet see, that the laughter would grow quiet, and that the promise of safety would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. But in that moment, in that small, bright kitchen, she allowed herself to believe, because for now, that was all she could do. The mornings in Michael's apartment began to develop a rhythm, a kind of quiet cadence that settled into Nia's bones like a comforting hum. Ania would wake up to the smell of pancakes or oatmeal, her small feet padding across the wooden floors as she found her way to the kitchen, her hair a halo of soft curls around her face, her teddy bear still tucked under one arm. Michael would greet her with a gentle smile, pouring syrup over her plate, cutting the pancakes into neat pieces just the way she liked them. Nia often watched them from the hallway, clutching a cup of coffee between her hands, letting the warmth seep into her skin as she tried to let herself believe that this was what safety felt like. At first, it seemed like nothing could touch the peace they were building. Anya adjusted quickly to the new apartment, returning from school with stories about her teachers, about the girl named Keisha who shared her markers, about the songs they learned in music class. She would sit on the floor in the living room, crayons scattered around her, carefully coloring pictures of cats and flowers, bringing them to Michael to show him when she was done. He would praise her softly, hanging the pictures on the refrigerator with bright magnets, telling her how talented she was, ruffling her curls with a soft laugh that made her eyes light up. Nia found herself relaxing into this new life. She still worked long shifts, still returned home with tired shoulders, but now she came back to a warm dinner waiting, to Anya's laughter ringing in the hallway, to the sight of Michael reading to Anya on the couch, her small body curled up against his side as she listened to the words he read in his calm, steady voice. In those moments, Nia felt as if she had stepped into a life she had only dared to dream about, a life where her daughter was safe and loved, where she was not alone in carrying the weight of the world. But slowly, like a thin crack spreading across glass, small things began to shift in the quiet rhythm of their home. It began with little moments, so subtle that Nia almost missed them at first. One morning, as Michael leaned down to kiss Anya on the forehead before school, Nia noticed the way Ania's body tensed, her shoulders pulling up for just a second before she forced herself to relax. Another evening, as they watched a movie together, Michael reached out to adjust the blanket around Anya, and Nia saw her flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, quickly masked by a small, tight smile as she nodded when Michael asked if she was comfortable. Nia tried to dismiss these observations, telling herself that Anya was just adjusting to living with someone new, that it was natural for a child to need time to grow used to a new parent figure in her life. She told herself that Michael was kind, patient, always gentle with Anya, that he had never raised his voice or shown any sign of anger. She reminded herself of all the times Anya had run to Michael with her drawings, of the way she had laughed when he lifted her up and spun her around in the kitchen, her giggles filling the air like music. Yet the small cracks continued to grow. Anya's drawings began to change. Instead of colorful flowers and playful cats, she started to draw simple shapes, letters and numbers written over and over in neat, careful lines. Nia found sheets of paper in the trash, covered in the alphabet written repeatedly, with letters pressed into the paper so hard that they left indentations on the next page. When Nia asked her about it, Anya would smile, a strained small curve of her lips, and say she was just practicing for school, that she wanted to be good. The evenings grew quieter. Anya, who used to sing softly to herself while she colored, now sat in silence, her crayons lined up neatly in color order, her hands folded carefully on her lap between each drawing. She began to look up quickly whenever Michael entered the room, her eyes wide, her body going still, as if waiting for something Nia could not see. When Michael spoke to her, she would respond in a soft, flat voice, her eyes lowered, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. One night, Nia came home late from her shift, the air cold against her skin as she unlocked the door quietly, not wanting to wake them. She set her bag down gently and moved toward Ania's room, intending to check on her before collapsing into bed herself. But as she opened the door, she found Ania sitting on the floor beside her bed, her teddy bear clutched to her chest, her knees pulled up under her chin. Her eyes were open, staring at the far wall, unblinking, the moonlight from the window casting a pale glow over her small face. Nia dropped to her knees, reaching out for her daughter, her hands trembling. "Anya, baby, what's wrong?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Anya blinked, her eyes flickering to Nia's face, and for a moment her lips parted as if she were about to speak. But then she shook her head quickly, clutching the teddy bear tighter, her small body curling further into itself. Nia gathered her daughter into her arms, lifting her onto the bed, tucking the blanket around her as Anya closed her eyes tightly, her breathing shallow and quick. Nia sat beside her, stroking her hair until she felt the child's body finally relax into sleep, the tension in her small limbs easing slowly, though her fingers remained wrapped tightly around the teddy bear's ear. The next morning, as they sat at the table, Ania quietly eating her cereal, Michael placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, telling her to have a good day at school. Nia saw it again, that tiny flinch, the way Anya's spoon paused in the bowl, the way her eyes darted to Nia before looking back down at her breakfast. Michael did not seem to notice, continuing to speak softly, reminding her to pay attention in class, to be good, to make them proud. After Anya left for school, Nia confronted Michael, her voice low but firm, asking if he had noticed that Anya seemed afraid, that she was acting differently. Michael looked at her, his blue eyes calm, a faint smile on his lips as he shook his head. "She's just adjusting," he said, his voice steady, reassuring. "It's a lot for a child, moving in with someone new. She just needs time, Nia." Nia wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust in the warmth she had felt, in the safety she had believed they had found. She tried to push away the unease that curled in her stomach like a cold, heavy stone, telling herself that she was overthinking, that Anya was safe, that Michael would never hurt her. But the signs kept coming. Anya stopped bringing her drawings to Michael, leaving them on the table instead, avoiding eye contact when he praised her, forcing a small smile that did not reach her eyes. She began to retreat into herself, spending more time alone in her room, sitting on the floor with her teddy bear, her eyes distant, her body still. She no longer sang as she brushed her hair, no longer danced through the living room when her favorite songs played on the radio. One evening, as Nia was folding laundry in the bedroom, she heard the sound of water running in the bathroom. She knocked softly before opening the door, finding Anya standing on a stool by the sink, scrubbing her hands over and over, the soap forming bubbles that slid down her arms, dripping onto the floor. Her small face was pale, her eyes focused on the sink, her lips moving in a whisper that Nia could not quite hear. Nia moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Anya's shoulder, asking softly, "What are you doing, baby?" Anya did not look up, her hands scrubbing harder, the skin turning red under the constant friction. Her voice was barely audible, a whisper carried away by the water. "I'm dirty," she said, her words catching in her throat. "I have to be clean. I have to be good." Nia's heart broke as she turned off the water, taking Ania's small hands in hers, drying them gently with a towel as the child trembled, tears filling her eyes but not falling. She lifted Anya into her arms, holding her close, whispering that she was not dirty, that she was perfect, that she was safe. Anya buried her face into Nia's shoulder, her small body shaking with silent sobs that tore through the quiet of the room. That night, as Nia lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, unable to close her eyes, the words Anya had whispered echoing in her mind. She turned to look at Michael, who was already asleep, his breathing even, his face calm in the dim light of the lamp. She studied him, searching for something in his features, some sign, some crack in the calm, but there was nothing, only the steady rise and fall of his chest, the soft exhale of his breath. The house felt different now, the silence no longer comforting but heavy, pressing down on her as she listened to the creaks of the walls, the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. She thought of Anya, sleeping in the next room, her small hands clutching her teddy bear, her body curling into itself as if trying to disappear. In the morning, Anya's smiles were softer, her laughter rare and fleeting. She still hugged Michael when he offered, but Nia saw how the light in her daughter's eyes dimmed each time, how her small hands gripped her teddy bear tighter when she pulled away. Michael continued to smile, continued to speak softly, continued to be the man everyone said was perfect, but the crack in the glass was spreading, and Nia could feel the fracture deepening in the space between them. She began to watch, to notice the small things that no one else seemed to see. The way Anya's drawings had disappeared from the refrigerator, replaced by blank pages and neatly written letters. The way she jumped at small sounds, the way she watched Michael from the corner of her eyes, her body going still when he entered the room. The way she began to retreat into silence, her laughter replaced by quiet nods, her songs replaced by whispers in the dark. And in the quiet of the night, as the house settled around them, Nia lay awake, her eyes open, the weight of her daughter's silence pressing against her chest, and for the first time she allowed herself to admit the fear that had begun to bloom in the corners of her heart. She did not know what was happening yet. did not have the words for the unease that was growing, but she knew one thing with painful clarity. Something was wrong. Something was happening to her daughter, something that was stealing the light from her eyes, the song from her lips, the laughter from her days. And Nia knew that she would have to find out what it was, no matter what it cost her, because Ania was her world, her reason, and she would not allow the shadows to take her daughter away. The morning sunlight broke through the thin curtains, casting soft lines of gold across the floor as Nia stood in the doorway of Anya's room, watching her daughter slowly dress for school. Anya moved quietly, pulling her socks up with precise care, folding the edge just so, her small fingers smoothing down the creases in her uniform skirt until it was perfect. She glanced up at Nia, her eyes dark and unreadable, before looking back down to adjust the collar of her shirt with the same careful attention, as if the very fabric of her clothing might betray her if it was not just right. Nia's heart ached as she watched Anya pick up her backpack, holding it to her chest for a moment before slipping it over her shoulders. The backpack looked too large on her small frame, making her seem even smaller than she was, and Nia had to resist the urge to rush forward and pull her into her arms, to hold her tightly and promise her that everything would be all right. But Anya was already moving past her, her steps quiet on the floor as she headed towards the kitchen where Michael was waiting with breakfast. Michael smiled as Anya entered, placing a plate of pancakes in front of her, cutting them into small pieces just the way she liked. He spoke to her in his usual calm, even tone, asking her how she slept, if she was ready for school, if she remembered to pack her homework. Anya nodded, answering in soft, short sentences, her eyes on her plate as she carefully lifted each piece of pancake with her fork, chewing slowly, methodically, as if each bite required her full concentration. Michael reached over to smooth a strand of hair from her forehead, and Nia saw it again, the way Ania's shoulders tensed, the way her fork paused just for a moment, before she forced herself to continue. After Anya left for school, Nia lingered in the kitchen, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she watched Michael wash the dishes, his movements smooth and unhurried. She tried to find the words, tried to shape the questions that burned in her mind, but every time she opened her mouth, the words died on her tongue. Michael turned to her, smiling, asking if she needed a ride to work, and Nia forced herself to smile back, shaking her head, telling him she would be fine. When she arrived home that afternoon, she found Ania sitting on the floor of her room, her legs crossed beneath her, her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. The crayons and paper that once littered the floor were gone, replaced by neatly stacked sheets of lined paper covered in rows of letters and numbers written in Anya's careful, precise handwriting. Nia knelt down beside her, picking up one of the sheets, running her fingers over the grooves pressed deep into the paper by the force of Ania's hand. The letters were perfect, uniform, repeated over and over, page after page, as if Ania was trying to carve them into the paper, as if the act of writing them might keep something at bay. Nia gently touched Ania's shoulder, and the girl flinched, looking up with wide, frightened eyes before quickly lowering her gaze. "Baby, why are you writing so much?" Nia asked softly, trying to keep her voice calm, gentle, unthreatening. Anya hugged the teddy bear tighter, her small fingers twisting into the worn fabric, and shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line as tears pooled in her eyes. "I have to," she whispered, so quietly that Nia had to lean closer to hear her. "I have to be good." The words cut through Nia like a blade, and she pulled Anya into her arms, holding her close, feeling the way her daughter's small body trembled against her. She kissed the top of her head, rocking her gently, whispering that she was good, that she didn't have to prove anything to anyone, that she was loved exactly as she was. Anya clung to her, burying her face in Nia's shoulder, her tears soaking into Nia's shirt as she sobbed silently, her small hands clutching at her mother as if she were the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. That night, after Anya had fallen asleep, Nia sat in the darkened living room, staring out the window at the empty street below, the glow of the street lights casting long shadows across the floor. Michael was in the kitchen, washing the dinner dishes, humming softly to himself, his presence calm and unhurried. Nia closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the water running, the clink of dishes being set on the drying rack, and she tried to reconcile the image of the man in the kitchen with the fear she saw in her daughter's eyes. She remembered the way Anya's shoulders had stiffened under Michael's touch, the way she had flinched, the way she had whispered, "I have to be good." She remembered the way Anya's laughter had faded, replaced by silence, by whispers in the dark, by tears she tried to hide. She remembered the way Anya had sat on the floor, writing letters and numbers over and over, her small hand moving with desperate precision, as if the act of writing might keep her safe. Nia felt the fear rise in her chest, cold and suffocating, as she realized that something was happening, something she could not see but could feel in every glance, every flinch, every whispered word. She thought of the promises she had made to Anya, the promises of safety, of love, of protection, and she felt the weight of those promises settle heavily on her shoulders. She could not ignore the signs any longer. She could not pretend that everything was all right. The next morning, Nia decided to stay home from work, telling Michael that she wasn't feeling well. She watched as he kissed Anya on the forehead before school, saw the way her daughter's body stiffened, the way her eyes flickered to Nia, pleading, before she forced a small smile and walked out the door, her backpack hanging heavily from her shoulders. After Anya left, Michael turned to Nia, asking if she needed anything, if she would be all right alone, his voice calm and caring. Nia forced herself to smile, shaking her head, telling him she would be fine, that she just needed to rest. As soon as Michael left for work, Nia began to search. She went into Anya's room, opening drawers, looking through her backpack, her notebooks, searching for any clue, any piece of evidence that might explain the fear in her daughter's eyes. She found the drawings Anya had hidden in the bottom of her drawer, drawings of a small, sad girl sitting alone, drawings of a figure standing in the doorway, drawings with words written in the margins, words like sorry, good, and quiet, repeated over and over. Nia's hands shook as she held the papers, tears blurring her vision as she tried to piece together the truth from the fragments her daughter had left behind. When Anya came home from school that afternoon, Nia pulled her into her arms, holding her close, feeling the way her daughter's small body pressed into her, the way her arms wrapped tightly around her mother's waist. Nia kissed the top of her head, whispering that she loved her, that she was safe, that she could tell her anything. Anya looked up at her, her eyes wide, tears welling up as her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, her voice so soft it was barely more than a breath. "He did it again," she whispered, her eyes darting to the hallway as if she expected Michael to appear at any moment. "Please, don't tell." Nia's heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat as she pulled Ania closer, pressing her lips to her forehead, trying to steady the trembling that had taken over her body. "Who, baby?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. Anya pressed her face into Nia's shoulder, her small hands clutching the fabric of her mother's shirt, and she shook her head, refusing to speak. That night, Nia could not sleep. She lay in bed beside Michael, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his breathing, steady and calm, while her mind raced with fear and confusion. She thought of Anya's words, the way her voice had broken, the way she had begged her not to tell. She thought of the drawings, the whispered words, the fear in her daughter's eyes. She thought of the promises she had made, the promise to protect her, to keep her safe, and she knew that she could not ignore the whispers any longer. In the morning, Nia watched as Michael prepared breakfast, as he smiled at Ania, as he kissed her forehead before she left for school, and she saw it again, the flinch, the fear, the way Ania forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. She watched as Michael turned to her, smiling, asking if she needed anything, and she forced herself to smile back, hiding the fear that was growing inside her. When Anya returned home from school that day, she was quiet, her eyes downcast, her hands clutching her backpack straps tightly as she moved past Michael, heading straight for her room. Nia followed her, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching as Anya hugged her teddy bear, rocking back and forth, whispering to herself. Nia reached out, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's back, and Ania froze, her body going, still her whispers stopping. "Baby, you can tell me," Nia said softly, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. "Please, Ania, please tell me." Anya turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting her mother's, and for a moment there was a flicker of something there, a desperate, pleading look that tore at Nia's heart. Anya opened her mouth, her lips trembling, and she whispered, "He said I have to be good, or I'll make him angry." The words were like a blade, cutting through Nia's chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. She pulled Anya into her arms, holding her tightly, feeling the way her daughter clung to her, the way her small body shook with silent sobs. Nia closed her eyes, pressing her lips to Anya's hair, promising her silently that she would protect her, that she would keep her safe, that she would find the truth and do whatever it took to keep the shadows away. That night, as Nia sat in the darkened living room listening to the quiet sounds of the house around her, she made a decision. She would no longer ignore the whispers, no longer pretend that everything was all right. She would watch, she would listen, and she would find the truth no matter what it cost her, because Ania was her daughter, her world, and she would not allow the fear to steal her away. The whispers would no longer go unheard. The night passed with the soft creaking of the old apartment settling into itself, the ticking of the clock on the wall, and the whisper of Ania's breathing as she slept with her small hand wrapped tightly around her mother's wrist. Nia lay awake, her eyes fixed on the shadows shifting on the ceiling, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue as she felt each second pass in the heavy, restless silence. She could feel the questions pressing against her ribs, pressing until it hurt to breathe, but she forced herself to remain still, her other hand stroking Ania's curls as the child's body twitched softly in sleep. In the morning, Nia watched Ania dress herself with the same careful precision that had become her habit, the child's small fingers smoothing every wrinkle, adjusting every fold of fabric as if she believed something terrible would happen if she didn't get it just right. She looked smaller in the morning light, pale and thin, her eyes dark and cautious as they flickered toward Michael while he set her breakfast on the table. The smell of oatmeal and cinnamon filled the kitchen, but it felt like a mask, a thin layer of normalcy stretched over something that Nia could not yet name, but felt in her bones. Michael moved around the kitchen quietly, placing a cup of coffee in front of Nia, brushing a hand across her shoulder as he passed. Ania flinched at the small sounds of the utensils against the bowl, her spoon trembling in her hand, before she forced herself to lift it to her mouth. Michael noticed nothing, or if he did, he said nothing, his soft humming filling the space between them as he wiped the counter and washed his cup, his movements steady, routine, gentle. Nia found herself studying his face, searching for something she could not yet see, something hidden behind the calm lines and easy smiles. After Anya left for school, Nia stood by the window, watching her small figure move down the sidewalk, the weight of her backpack making her shoulders hunch, her steps slow, her head down. She pressed a hand against the cold glass, her breath fogging the surface as she whispered a promise she wasn't sure how to keep. She watched until Anya turned the corner and disappeared, her heart twisting with the need to follow, to take her daughter by the hand and run as far as they could, somewhere where the fear could not reach them. The day passed slowly, the quiet of the apartment heavy and thick. Michael worked from home, his voice low as he spoke on the phone in the other room, the tapping of his keyboard a steady rhythm that seemed to fill every corner of the house. Nia moved through the rooms like a ghost, picking up Ania's toys from the floor, folding small shirts and socks, her mind repeating the words Anya had whispered, the fear in her eyes when she had said she could not speak, the way her body had curled in on itself as if trying to disappear. When Anya came home that afternoon, Nia was waiting by the door, kneeling to take her backpack, to pull her into a hug. Anya stood stiffly for a moment before pressing her face into her mother's shoulder, her small arms wrapping around Nia's neck, her breath shaking as she tried to keep herself together. Nia held her for as long as she could before Michael's footsteps came from the kitchen, before his gentle voice filled the hallway with questions about her day, about school, about the story she was reading. Ania pulled away then, forcing a small smile, nodding quickly before slipping past him into her room, closing the door softly behind her. The house grew quiet again, the silence deeper than before, heavy with all the words left unsaid. Michael moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner, his movements calm, unhurried, as if nothing was wrong, as if the silence meant peace. Nia sat at the table, her eyes on the closed door of Anya's room, her mind replaying every moment, every flinch, every whisper, trying to find the thread that would lead her to the truth. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Anya picked at her food, her eyes on her plate, her fingers trembling as she tried to keep them steady. Michael reached over to hand her a napkin, his fingers brushing against her hand, and Anya flinched, the fork clattering against the plate as she pulled her hand back quickly, her eyes wide, her breath catching in her throat. Michael paused, his smile faltering for just a moment before returning. Before he reached out again, placing the napkin beside her plate, his voice calm as he told her it was all right. That accidents happened. Nia saw it all, the way Ania's eyes flickered to her, pleading, the way her shoulders hunched as she forced herself to pick up the fork again, to take a small bite, to chew and swallow even as tears filled her eyes. She saw the way Michael's eyes lingered on Ania for just a moment too long, the way his smile seemed too still, too careful. The silence in the house became a presence, a thing that watched them, that pressed against Nia's chest until she could barely breathe. Later that night, as Nia folded laundry in the living room, she heard the soft creak of the bathroom door. She stepped into the hallway, peering around the corner to see Anya standing at the sink, her small hands scrubbing over and over, the soap sliding down her arms in thin white lines dripping onto the floor. Her face was pale, her lips moving silently as she scrubbed, her eyes unfocused, staring into the sink as if she could see something there that no one else could. Nia stepped forward, calling Anya's name softly, but the child did not look up, did not stop scrubbing. Nia moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, feeling the way Anya's small body tensed under her touch, the way her hands moved faster, the water splashing against the porcelain as she whispered, "I have to be clean, I have to be clean, I have to be clean." The words were like a prayer, desperate and broken, and Nia felt her knees weaken as she turned off the faucet, as she pulled Ania's hands from the water, wrapping them in a towel, holding them gently as the child shook, as tears fell from her eyes, mixing with the soap and water on her skin. Nia knelt in front of her, whispering that she was clean, that she was safe, that she did not need to do this, but Anya only shook her head, her lips moving as she whispered, "I have to, I have to." He said, "I have to." Nia held her daughter that night as she fell asleep, the small body curled into hers, the child's breath shaky, her hands gripping Nia's shirt as if letting go would mean falling into the darkness that waited in the corners of the room. Nia stayed awake long after Ania's breathing had evened out, her eyes on the shadows that moved across the walls, her mind filled with questions, with fear, with a growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Nia decided to keep Ania home from school, telling Michael that she wasn't feeling well, that she needed a day to rest. Michael smiled, nodding, placing a gentle hand on Ania's head, telling her to get well soon, his voice soft, calm, warm. Ania's eyes widened, her small body going still under his touch, her hands clutching the hem of her shirt as she forced a small nod, her lips pressed together tightly. After Michael left for work, Nia sat with Anya on the couch, holding her small hands in hers, brushing the hair back from her face, trying to find the right words, the words that would open the door to the truth. "Anya," she whispered, "you can tell me anything, baby. You know that, don't you? You can always tell me." Anya's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she looked at her mother, her small hands tightening around Nia's fingers. She opened her mouth, closed it, shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks as she pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. Nia held her tightly, whispering that it was okay, that she was safe, that she could take her time. In the quiet that followed, Anya finally lifted her head, her eyes red, her breath hitching as she whispered, "He said I have to be good, or I'll make him angry. I don't want him to be angry, Mama." Nia felt the world tilt, felt her breath leave her lungs as she held Ania tighter, kissing the top of her head, whispering that it was not her fault, that she was good, that she was loved. She rocked her gently, feeling the way Anya's small hands clutched at her, the way her breath slowly steadied, the way she finally fell asleep in her mother's arms. That night, as Nia lay in bed beside Michael, listening to the even sound of his breathing, she stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on her as she thought about Ania's words, about the fear in her eyes, about the silence that filled their home like a heavy fog. She thought about the promises she had made to protect her daughter, to keep her safe, and she felt the weight of those promises settle into her bones, filling her with a resolve that burned through the fear. She knew now that the silence in their home was not peace, but a shield, a mask hiding something dark, something that was stealing the light from her daughter's eyes, the laughter from her days, the songs from her lips. She knew that she could no longer ignore the signs, could no longer pretend that everything was all right. In the darkness, as the house slept around her, Nia made a promise to herself and to her daughter. She would find the truth, she would protect Ania, and she would not allow the silence to swallow them whole. The silence in the house would end. The rain had been falling since dawn, quiet and steady, tapping against the windows in a rhythm that seemed to echo the quiet dread in Nia's chest as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea cooling between her hands. She could hear the sound of the water in the pipes as Michael took his morning shower, the low hum of the heater kicking on to warm the damp air, the faint creak of the floorboards in Ania's room as her small feet moved across the floor. Each sound felt louder now, sharper, carrying with it a weight that pressed down on the house until the silence between the noises became almost unbearable. Nia lifted her eyes as Anya stepped into the kitchen, her hair pulled back neatly, her uniform perfectly pressed, her backpack hanging from her thin shoulders. The child's eyes met her mother's for a brief moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them before Ania lowered her gaze to the floor, moving to sit at the table with the quiet, careful precision that had become her habit. Michael emerged from the hallway, the steam from the bathroom still clinging to him as he walked barefoot across the kitchen floor, his hair damp, his shirt crisp and clean. He smiled as he reached over to ruffle Ania's hair, but Nia saw the way Ania's shoulders jumped, the way her small hands tightened around the edge of the table, the way her breath caught in her throat before she forced herself to smile. Nia felt something tighten inside her, something sharp and hot, as she watched her daughter's small body tense under Michael's touch. She saw the way Ania's eyes flickered toward her, just for a moment, just long enough to send a silent plea that cut through Nia like a blade. Michael moved to pour himself a cup of coffee, humming softly as he added sugar and stirred, his movements calm and unhurried, as if nothing had happened, as if the child at the table was not trembling under his gentle hand. As Michael left for work, kissing Nia on the cheek, telling Anya to have a good day, Nia forced herself to smile, to nod, to play the part of the calm, grateful wife, but inside, the sharp, hot feeling was growing, rising like a wave that would soon be too large to hold back. She watched from the window as Michael's car pulled out of the driveway, turning down the street until it disappeared, and only then did she let out the breath she had been holding, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the cool glass. She turned to find Ania standing in the hallway, her backpack still on, her eyes wide, watching her mother with a fear that made Nia's heart break all over again. Nia opened her arms, and Anya rushed into them, burying her face against her mother's chest, her small body shaking with silent sobs that she tried to hold back. Nia held her tightly, whispering that it was all right, that she was safe, that Mama was here, that nothing would happen to her as long as she was in her arms. That day, Nia kept Anya home from school, calling in to say that her daughter was sick, her voice steady despite the shaking in her hands. She spent the day watching Anya, sitting with her on the couch, reading to her, brushing her hair, trying to pull laughter back into the child's eyes, but the smiles that came were small, quick, and fell away like fragile petals in the rain. Ania's eyes remained distant, her hands twisting in the hem of her shirt whenever there was a loud noise, or when Nia's phone buzzed with a message. She was a bird caught in a storm, unable to find a place to land, fluttering inside herself, and Nia could see it, could feel it, could no longer pretend that it was anything else. In the quiet of the afternoon, as the rain tapped against the window, Nia went into Anya's room while the child napped on the couch, the teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest even in sleep. Nia opened drawers, lifting clothes, checking under the bed, searching for anything that might give her more than the whispers, the flinches, the drawings, hidden in the bottom of the drawer. She found small things that struck her like lightning. The elastic band, stretched and worn, tucked into the corner of a drawer. The pages of letters and numbers written over and over with the words, "Be good," scribbled in the margins until the pencil tore the paper. The drawings of a figure standing in a doorway, eyes dark, body looming, while a small figure cowered in the corner of the page. Nia sat on the floor, holding the papers in her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as the weight of the truth pressed against her, undeniable now, clear and terrible in its simplicity. She thought of the way Anya scrubbed her hands raw in the sink, whispering that she needed to be clean, the way she froze when Michael touched her, the way she whispered that she could not speak because it would make him angry. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, drumming against the glass, echoing the pounding of Nia's heart as she stood, wiping the tears from her face, tucking the papers into a folder she hid beneath her shirt. When Michael came home that evening, he was carrying a small bag of groceries, smiling as he stepped inside, shaking the rain from his jacket before hanging it by the door. He called out to Anya, asking her how she was feeling, telling her that he had brought her favorite cookies, his voice warm and soft, the smile on his face gentle and reassuring. Anya stepped into the hallway, her eyes on the floor, her hands clasped in front of her, her body still as she nodded, whispering a thank you that barely made it past her lips. Michael bent down to kiss the top of her head, and Nia saw the way Anya's body flinched, the way her eyes squeezed shut, the way her breath caught in her throat. It was the last straw. Nia felt the wave inside her break, felt the fear and the anger and the love for her daughter rise up in her like a storm, clearing away the fog of doubt that had held her back for too long. She moved forward, taking Ania's hand, pulling her gently but firmly away from Michael, placing herself between them as she looked up at him, her eyes steady, her voice calm as she told him to leave the room, to give them space. Michael's eyes widened, confusion flickering across his face before he forced a smile, raising his hands as he stepped back, nodding, telling her that he would give them a moment. Nia took Ania to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind them, kneeling in front of her daughter, holding her small hands in hers. "Anya," she whispered, her voice shaking as she tried to keep it steady. "Baby, you have to tell me the truth now. You have to tell Mama what's happening." Anya's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she shook her head, pulling her hands away to wrap them around the teddy bear she held against her chest. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He said I can't." Nia felt the tears filling her eyes, but she blinked them back, reaching out to gently cup her daughter's face in her hands. "You can," she whispered. "You can, baby. I'm here. I will protect you. I will not let him hurt you. Please, Ania, please tell Mama." For a moment there was silence, the air thick and heavy, the rain outside the only sound in the world. Then, slowly, Anya nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, "He comes into my room at night. He says I have to be good. He says if I'm not, I'll make him angry." The words fell into the space between them like stones, each one pulling Nia deeper into the cold water of fear and rage that had been building inside her. She pulled Anya into her arms, holding her tightly as the child sobbed, her small body shaking with the weight of the words she had finally spoken, the secret she had finally shared. Nia kissed the top of her head, rocking her gently, whispering that she was safe now, that Mama would take care of it, that she would never let him near her again. That night, after Anya had fallen asleep in her arms, Nia laid her down in her bed, tucking the blankets around her, brushing the hair back from her face as she pressed a kiss to her forehead. She stepped out of the room, closing the door softly, turning to find Michael standing in the hallway, his eyes on her, his face calm, but she saw it now. Saw the tightness in his jaw, the cold calculation in his eyes, the small flicker of fear that crossed his face when he saw the look in hers. Nia did not speak. She walked past him, moving to the kitchen where she picked up her phone, dialing the number with steady hands, pressing the speaker to her ear as she heard the ring, the click as the call connected. 911, what is your emergency? Nia took a deep breath, her eyes closing as the tears slipped down her cheeks, her voice steady and strong as she spoke the words that would change everything. I need to report a case of child abuse in my home. My daughter is not safe. Please, we need help. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the promise that the silence that had held their house captive was ending, that the truth would come to light, that Anya would be safe. It was the last straw, and Nia would never be silent again. The night after Nia made the call was long and silent, the air heavy as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what would come. She sat in the living room with Anya asleep on her lap, the child's small face pressed against her chest, her breathing shallow but calm, her fingers still curled around her mother's shirt even in sleep. Nia held her close, her own breath catching every so often as her mind replayed every moment, every flinch, every whispered word, now strung together into a chain she could no longer ignore, each link forged in fear and in love, until it had become strong enough to carry the weight of truth. The knock came just before dawn, a quiet, controlled rapping that made Nia's heart leap into her throat. She stood, gently laying Anya on the couch and pulling a blanket over her before she moved to the door, her hand trembling as she opened it to find 2 officers standing there, their faces calm but serious, the cold morning air swirling around them as if it, too, was carrying the gravity of what was about to happen. Behind them, a social worker stepped forward, a woman with tired eyes and a soft voice, introducing herself as she stepped into the home, looking around with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many living rooms like this one, too many mothers standing with tears on their cheeks, too many children wrapped in blankets on couches in the early hours of the morning. Nia answered their questions quietly, her voice steady as she explained what had been happening, what Anya had whispered, the way she had flinched, the way she had scrubbed her hands until they were raw, the way she had drawn pictures of a shadow standing in her doorway while she cowered in the corner of the page. The social worker listened, nodding, taking notes in a small worn notebook, her pen moving swiftly but quietly as she glanced up at Ania sleeping on the couch, her eyes softening as she looked at the small child clutching her teddy bear. Michael was woken by the sound of voices, his footsteps soft in the hallway as he came into the room, his hair rumpled, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of the officers, the social worker, Nia standing with her hands clenched at her sides. His confusion was quick to settle into a smile, calm and practiced, as he asked what was going on, his voice smooth and steady as he tried to laugh it off, asking if there had been some sort of mistake. But the officers did not smile, did not move, only told him calmly that there had been a report, that they were here to investigate, that they needed to speak with him privately. The smile on Michael's face faltered then, just for a moment, just long enough for Nia to see the shadow pass through his eyes before he forced it back, raising his hands slightly as he nodded, telling them of course, he would cooperate, that there was nothing to hide, that this was all just a misunderstanding. But Nia saw it, saw the flicker of fear, of anger, of something dark that twisted in the corners of his eyes, something that had been hidden beneath the calm smiles and soft words, something that she knew now had been there all along. They took him into the kitchen. The door left slightly ajar so that Nia could hear the low murmur of voices, the calm but firm questions, the measured responses, the way Michael's voice would rise just slightly before lowering again, before smoothing out into reassurances and practiced laughter. Nia sat by Ania, brushing the hair back from her forehead as the child slowly began to wake, blinking up at her mother with wide, confused eyes as she looked around at the strangers in the room, her small body tensing as she tried to sit up. "It's okay, baby," Nia whispered, holding her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's okay. You're safe now." The social worker came to sit beside them, her voice soft as she introduced herself to Anya, showing her the small stuffed bear she carried in her bag, asking if she liked bears, if she wanted to hold this one for a while. Anya looked at the bear, then at her mother, her eyes questioning, fearful, before she slowly reached out to take it, holding it tightly in her small hands as she nodded, her lips pressed together as she tried to be brave. The social worker smiled, telling Anya that she was very strong, that she was very brave, that she was safe now, and could tell her anything she wanted, anything that made her scared, anything that hurt. At first, Ania said nothing, her eyes flicking towards the kitchen door, her fingers twisting in the fur of the bear as she shook her head, tears filling her eyes as she whispered that she could not, that she was not allowed, that he said she would make him angry. The social worker glanced at Nia, who took Ania's hands in hers, squeezing them gently, whispering, "You can, baby. Mama is here. You can tell her. You're safe now." It was a long moment, the rain tapping against the window, the clock ticking on the wall, the sound of Michael's voice in the kitchen, pausing as if he too was listening. Then, slowly, in a voice so soft it was almost lost in the quiet of the room, Anya began to speak. She spoke of the nights when Michael would come into her room, when he would sit on the edge of her bed, telling her that she had to be good, that she had to be quiet, that she had to do what he said, or he would be angry, or Mama would be sad, or she would not be allowed to stay. She spoke of the way he would hold her wrists, telling her not to cry, that crying was for bad girls, that bad girls made people angry. She spoke of the way she would scrub her hands in the sink until they were red, trying to feel clean, trying to feel like she was good again. The words spilled out in fits and starts, broken by tears, by the small hiccups of breath as she tried to be brave, as she tried to say the things she had been told never to say. The social worker nodded, listening, never interrupting, telling Anya that she was brave, that she was strong, that she had done the right thing by telling the truth. Nia held her daughter, tears streaming down her own face, her heart breaking with every word, every tremble, every sob, but she held Ania tightly, whispering over and over that she was safe, that it was over, that Mama was here. In the kitchen, the conversation grew louder, Michael's voice rising as he began to understand that this was not something he could laugh away, that the truth was out now, that the silence he had hidden behind had been shattered by a child's whisper. The officers stepped out, their faces calm but firm, asking him to stand, telling him that they needed to take him in for questioning, that there were things that needed to be investigated, that there were reports that needed to be addressed. Michael turned to Nia, his eyes wide, his mouth open as if he wanted to speak, to say something, to protest. But Nia stood, her hand on Anya's shoulder, her eyes meeting his with a steady, cold certainty that made him stop, that made him close his mouth, that made him lower his eyes as the officers took his arms and led him toward the door. He did not resist, did not struggle, but Nia saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes flickered with anger, with fear, with something dark that twisted as he stepped out into the rain, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality that echoed through the house. After they were gone, the social worker turned to Nia, explaining the next steps, the process that would follow, the questions that would need to be answered, the interviews, the assessments, the court dates. Nia listened, nodding, her arm around Anya, who sat quietly beside her, clutching the bear, her eyes wide but calm, her body leaning against her mother as if she finally allowed herself to rest. The days that followed were filled with meetings, with visits from social workers and lawyers, with phone calls from the police, with questions asked and answered, with paperwork signed and filed. Each moment another step in the slow, heavy process of bringing the truth into the light. Anya was interviewed by professionals who knew how to speak softly, how to ask the right questions without causing more pain, how to listen without judgment as she told her story again and again, each telling a little easier, a little stronger, as the fear slowly began to loosen its hold on her small body. Nia sat beside her through every meeting, holding her hand, brushing her hair back from her face, reminding her that she was safe, that she was loved, that Mama was here. Each day, Ania's eyes grew clearer, the shadows slowly lifting, the small, tentative smiles returning as she began to believe that the silence was over, that the whispers no longer needed to be hidden, that the fear no longer controlled the air they breathed. The court date came, and Nia stood in the hallway of the courthouse, holding Ania's hand as they waited to be called in, the air thick with the quiet conversations of lawyers, the shuffle of papers, the creak of the old wooden benches beneath them. Michael was there, sitting across the hall, his suit neat, his hair combed, his face calm. But Nia saw the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against his knee, the way his eyes flickered toward them before looking away. When they entered the courtroom, the judge listened to the statements, to the evidence, to the reports from the social workers and the psychologists, to the testimony given softly, bravely, by a small child clutching a bear, her voice shaken but clear as she spoke the truth she had been told to hide. Nia sat beside her, her hand on her daughter's back, her eyes on the judge, her breath steady as she listened, as she watched, as she felt the weight of the moment settle around them. When the judge spoke, the words were clear and final, declaring that Michael would have no further contact with Anaya, that he was to be removed from their lives, that Anaya was to remain in the sole care of her mother, that the safety of the child was the priority, that the silence that had hidden the truth was broken now, replaced by the certainty of protection, of safety, of a future that no longer carried the weight of fear. As they stepped out of the courthouse into the light, the air felt different, the sky clear after days of rain, the world brighter, sharper, cleaner. Anya looked up at her mother, her eyes wide, her small hand clutching Nia's tightly as she whispered, "Is it over, Mama?" Nia knelt, pulling her daughter into her arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead as she whispered back, "Yes, baby, it's over. You're safe now." In that moment, standing on the steps of the courthouse with her daughter in her arms, Nia felt the weight that had pressed on her chest for so long begin to lift, the fear that had lived in the corners of their home dissolving in the light of the truth, the silence replaced by the sound of her daughter's breathing, steady and calm, by the promise of a life no longer shadowed by fear, by the quiet, certain knowledge that they were free. The unveiling was complete, and for the first time in a long time, Nia allowed herself to believe in the promise of tomorrow, in the hope that had carried her through the darkness, in the strength of a mother's love, in the courage of a child's truth, and in the quiet, powerful certainty that they would never be silent again. The morning after the court declared Ania's safety was quiet in a way that felt entirely new. It was not the tense, heavy silence that had clung to the apartment before, nor was it the fearful hush that had settled over Ania's shoulders every time Michael's footsteps echoed in the hallway. It was a quiet filled with the soft tick of the clock on the wall, the gentle hum of the heater against the cool morning air, and the slow, deep breaths of a child finally allowed to sleep without fear. Nia stood by the window, a cup of tea warm between her hands, watching as the early light painted the street in soft gold, breathing in the fragile promise of peace. Anya was still asleep, curled beneath her new yellow blanket, the teddy bear tucked against her cheek, her small hand resting open on the pillow, her fingers relaxed. Her face was calm, untroubled, her lashes resting softly against her skin as she breathed in and out, the rise and fall of her chest no longer quick and shallow but steady, unhurried, safe. Nia watched her for a long time, letting the sight of her daughter's peaceful sleep soak into her, letting it anchor her in this new beginning they were stepping into together. When Anya finally stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes, she looked around the room as if expecting something, her eyes pausing on the closed door before finding her mother standing there. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was hesitation, the shadow of fear flickering in Ania's gaze before it faded, replaced by the soft, hesitant smile that Nia had missed so desperately. Nia set her tea down and moved to the bed, sitting beside Ania, brushing the hair back from her face, pressing a kiss to her forehead as the child reached up to wrap her arms around her mother's neck, holding her tightly, whispering, "Mama." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, letting the morning pass in gentle stillness, the weight of the past days slowly unwinding from their bodies as the apartment filled with the small, familiar sounds of life. The kettle whistled on the stove, the floor creaked beneath Nia's steps as she moved to make breakfast, the soft rustle of Ania's coloring pages as she sat at the table, her crayons scattered around her once again, drawing flowers and suns and small houses with smoke curling from the chimneys. For the first time in many months, Anya sang softly to herself while she drew, her voice quiet but sweet, the melody simple and broken by small hums as she concentrated on the colors, her tongue poking out slightly as she carefully traced the lines of her drawing. Nia stood at the stove, watching her, tears filling her eyes as she listened to her daughter's song, the sound more precious than anything she had ever known, a sign that Ania was coming back to herself, piece by piece, breath by breath. The social worker visited that afternoon, her presence no longer bringing the fear it once had, but a calm reassurance that they were no longer alone in this. She sat with Ania, praising her drawings, asking if she wanted to hang them on the wall, and Ania nodded shyly, choosing the brightest one she had made, a drawing of a sun with a smiling face and long, yellow rays stretching across the page. Together, they taped it to the wall in the living room, Ania stepping back to look at it, her head tilted, her fingers twisting in the hem of her shirt before she looked up at her mother, her eyes bright. "It's for us, Mama," she said softly, "so we remember the sun is here." Nia knelt and hugged her, her tears soaking into Ania's hair as she whispered, Yes, baby. The sun is here now. The days began to settle into a new rhythm, one built on safety and slow healing. Ania returned to school, holding Nia's hand tightly the first morning, her steps hesitant as they approached the building, her eyes wide as she looked up at the tall doors. Nia knelt, cupping her daughter's face in her hands, reminding her that she was safe, that she could always tell Mama anything, that she could always say no, that she never had to be afraid again. Ania nodded, taking a deep breath before walking into her classroom, turning back just once to wave, her small smile a beacon of hope that carried Nia through the day. When Anya came home that afternoon, she was tired but calm, sitting at the kitchen table to eat the snack Nia prepared for her, telling her small stories about the girl who shared her markers, about the teacher who read them a story about a fox, about the way the sun had come through the window and made the classroom warm. She still paused sometimes, her eyes growing distant, her fingers going still as she remembered, but Nia would reach out, laying a hand over hers, grounding her, reminding her that she was home, that she was safe. They began attending therapy sessions together, Anya sitting on the soft rug in the small office, coloring while the therapist spoke softly, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply letting Ania speak when she was ready. At first, Ania said little, drawing quietly, her eyes downcast, but slowly she began to speak, telling the therapist about the fear, about the shadows, about the nights when she had hidden under her blanket, about the mornings when she had scrubbed her hands until they hurt, trying to wash away the bad feelings. Each word was a weight lifted, each sentence a step toward freedom. Nia listened, sometimes crying silently, sometimes holding Ania's hand, always there, always present, letting her daughter see that she was not alone, that her voice was heard, that her feelings were important, that she would never again be silenced. The therapist praised Ania for her courage, telling her that she was strong, that she was brave, that she was a survivor, and Nia saw the way those words began to settle in Ania's heart, the way her shoulders straightened, the way her eyes began to meet others again. At home, Ania began to reclaim the spaces that had once been filled with fear. She danced in the living room, her feet bare on the soft carpet, spinning slowly as she hummed to herself, her teddy bear held tightly in her arms. She sang softly as she brushed her hair before bed, letting Nia braid it for her again, the small routine comforting them both as they sat together in the warm light of the bedroom. She began to draw again, filling pages with bright colors, drawing suns and flowers, trees and houses, sometimes drawing herself and her mother holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. One night, as Nia tucked Anya into bed, the child looked up at her, her eyes wide and serious as she whispered, "Mama, will he ever come back?" Nia felt the fear rise, the old, sharp fear that still lived in the corners of her mind. But she took a breath, steadying herself, brushing the hair back from Ania's forehead as she looked into her eyes. "No, baby," she whispered firmly. "He will never come back. You are safe. Mama will always protect you." Anya looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of those words, before she nodded, a small, relieved sigh escaping her lips as she curled onto her side, pulling the teddy bear against her chest. Nia sat there until Anya's breathing evened out, until the soft, gentle rhythm of sleep filled the room, before she stood, turning off the light, leaving the door open just a crack, letting the soft glow from the hallway fill the room. In the quiet of the apartment, Nia moved to the window, looking out at the city lights, the streets quiet, the sky clear, the stars visible between the buildings. She thought of the journey they had taken, of the fear that had lived in their home, of the silence that had once been their constant companion, and of the courage it had taken to break it. She thought of Anya's small voice, of the way she had whispered the truth, of the way she had begun to smile again, to laugh again, to live again. Nia closed her eyes, letting the tears fall, not of fear or sadness, but of relief, of gratitude, of hope. She pressed a hand to the glass, whispering a promise to herself, to her daughter, to the world that had tried to break them, but had not succeeded. She promised that she would continue to protect Anaya, to fight for her, to give her the childhood she deserved, free from fear, filled with love and safety and the promise of tomorrow. The beginning of safety was not loud. It was not marked by grand gestures or sudden changes. It was in the small moments, in the sound of Anya's laughter, in the quiet songs she sang, in the way she reached for her mother's hand when they crossed the street, in the way she allowed herself to sleep through the night without waking in fear. It was in the way Nia learned to trust herself again, to believe in her own strength, to know that she had done the right thing, that she had saved her daughter, that she had saved herself. They would still have hard days, days when the shadows tried to return, when the memories crept back, when fear whispered in the corners of their minds. But they would face them together, with the knowledge that they had survived, that they were stronger than the darkness, that they had built a home where Anaya's laughter could fill the rooms, where her drawings could cover the walls, where the sun could shine through the windows and warm their skin. As Nia turned away from the window and moved to check on Anaya one last time before bed, she felt the quiet promise of the night wrapping around them, gentle and protective, a promise that tomorrow would come, that they would greet it together, that they would continue to heal, to grow, to live. And as she whispered goodnight to her daughter, brushing a soft kiss against her forehead, she knew with every beat of her heart that they had found the beginning of safety, and that it was enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you can catch the next one. Check out more stories on this channel whenever you're ready, and if this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it.